Good morning. My name is Jerry Behar. So I'm going to talk today and focus my talk on my start of a company called Web Filings. And Web Filings is the leading web-based or cloud-based solution provider for connected data, reporting, and compliance software. I grew up in Michigan. I went to Michigan State University, where I earned my bachelor's degree in business administration and accounting. And then I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, where I started my career. And after working for 7 years, I went to the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, where I earned my MBA. So essentially, what Web Filings, which later changed its name to Workiva, did was we developed a solution to automate the process for public companies to file their financial statements with the Securities Exchange Commission, the SEC. And this is the federal agency that's responsible for regulating financial markets and also for public companies. So essentially, what we had developed was a fully integrated web-based word processor, and the key kind of functionality that we focused on was the linking of numbers to text. So if you change one number, and a lot of numbers change in that document or in lots of other documents, they would update automatically, and the ability for people to collaborate, lots of people to be able to work at one time. So an example of one of the use cases for this is big banks who develop a risk management report that might be 2,000 pages to 20,000 pages, might have 100 people that are working on the document simultaneously, and they can all do that with no possibility of writing over somebody else's edits or working on the wrong revision, with very granular level permissions so that they only can work on the part of the document that they're entitled to. The other aspect was we had a number of feature sets and functionality that were very specific to this user requirement, and it ended up that this was a very compelling product then for them, and we were able to offer and price it very differently than we would if it was just a general purpose application. So this image shows how frustrating it was to people to be able to do that kind of process previously. So earlier in my career, even before I applied to business school, I was really interested in entrepreneurship. But I really only thought about it from the perspective of joining an early stage company. I never really felt like I had the confidence or the vision to actually start something on my own. And that changed when I was at Stanford Business School, as they had a bunch of speakers who would come, and these were the founders and CEOs of some of the hottest and most significant companies in Silicon Valley. And it began to dawn on me that they were just humans. They were regular people who had done great things, but they weren't preordained for greatness. It was really the first time that I started to think, well, maybe I could do something special. Maybe, but what? So before I went to business school, I had been responsible for the SEC reporting, the reporting to the Securities and Exchange Commission of the financial statements at our company. And these are big documents that might be 50 or 100 pages, and where every single number and word in the document is scrutinized by lawyers and accountants and board members and management and auditors. And every time there's a change in one number, it might ripple through the document, and 100 other numbers might need to change. So they send a team of people into the document to find all these changes and mark them with a red pencil. And then a stack this big comes to the people who are responsible for making all the edits, and then the people reviewing them have to go make sure that all these changes are done. So this image does not even depict how bad this was. It was a really manual and tedious and difficult process. So 4 years out from this job, and 2 years out from when I graduated from business school, I was working on my first startup, and I was using a product called FrameMaker, which was a technical documentation word processing application. And it was my first kind of eureka or aha moment, where I saw that in FrameMaker you had the ability to link a number from one place in the document to another place in the document. And I thought, wow, this would be great for use for this SEC reporting use case. and I started working on a business plan. But it became really apparent really quickly that you'd never be able to get the broad number of people that work on this process to adopt a highly technical, Unix-based application that had a big learning curve and was really expensive to adopt. So that was the end of that idea, well, for 18 years at least. Then I started, in that next period of time, I had been the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of a number of companies, and I'd started my second company called Financial Intelligence. And Financial Intelligence had grown really rapidly. We had more than tripled every year for 4 years. We were number 33 on the Inc. 500 list of America's fastest growing companies in 2008. But our focus was on helping companies deal with crisis accounting situations. And it became really clear that as those were wrapping up, our revenues were going to go off a really steep drop-off. And we were trying to think about, well, what would we do next? How are we going to pivot? And so my kind of ears were open for trying to think about what to do when on February 7th, 2008, Gary Clintworth walked into my office. And by the way, I never had met him before, and it was 8 years before I ever talked to him since. But he changed my life. As we were interviewing him for an SEC reporting job, Gary made the comment as the interview was winding down, "There's never been any automation in SEC reporting." Huh, it keeps me busy. And I looked at my colleague, Joe Howell, and I had an idea he knew what I was thinking about. And it later turned out that we had had a shared, simultaneous epiphany. And as we're walking Gary out the door, and the door is half shut, I looked at Joe and I said, "That's exactly what we're going to do." And we went back to the conference room and we spent the rest of the day starting to write the business plan for what would become web filings. So when we were starting the company, the premise for web filings comes back to this issue of linking. And just for perspective, and there's really just two elements that really were the basis for the whole company. The linking, which really Word and Excel don't play together, and they still don't, and the ability to collaborate, a lot of people working at one time. So just for perspective on linking, when we started the company, and one of our first customers told us every time they change one number that ripples through the document, it takes them 48 hours to be able to turn the next version of the document. And they had a goal to get that to be from 48 hours to 24 hours. But by having these documents all linked up, that process essentially became instantaneous. The other thing that was happening in 2008 was that there was just the beginning of a trend towards cloud computing, or software as a service, SaaS. So it was very early, and that's just starting to come about. So we felt that if we could address these things, along with addressing some of the functionality that was very particular to the users who focus on this SEC reporting, that we really could develop something special. So one of the questions that you're going to hear if you ever want to start something novel is, well, if it's such a good idea, how come someone else hasn't done that already? And we certainly got that question. So one of the things that you'll find as you kind of process ideas that come to you is when you look into it and start doing diligence, it'll oftentimes become apparent of all the flaws that you have in your idea, and you will understand why nobody has done that before, because maybe it was a terrible idea. But we were really clear that there was a value proposition to what we wanted to do, and there was a really good use case. And we thought maybe the biggest risk factor was that would the market adopt a cloud-based solution? Well, it turned out that the development process for this was like way, way, way harder than we ever imagined, and that turned out to be our biggest challenge. But we had pulled together a team of people that I'd worked with previously. There were 8 members of the founding team, 6 of us at an executive level. And on one hand, that really de-risked the company by having an experienced team, and 4 of us had tremendous specialty domain subject matter expertise. So that really helped us to be successful, but it also organizationally is difficult to have a team of that size, especially of people who are really experienced. So the attributes that allowed us to kind of go forward and get started with this were that we self-funded the company, which we were able to do largely because we were a more experienced group. And the process of getting from an idea to pulling together a team and financing it is really difficult. Most ideas never get to the stage of getting funded, but we were able to self-fund that. And I approached my family and we talked about this, and I realized that not only did we self-fund it, but myself and some of the co-founders had agreed that we would work for no salary for 2 years. So the reality was that if we weren't successful, I was going to be broke and really hard-pressed to find another job. And, but I never viewed that as a big risk factor because we were really clear that there was a value proposition, and I had tremendous confidence in the team. But again, it did turn out that it was way, way harder than we thought it was going to be. And that, in some ways, turned out to be an advantage for us because we had an A-plus development team, and somehow we got this product out the door. And all the competitors that tried to come and replicate this afterwards either gave up on it, they just abandoned their development effort, or they went broke trying to do that. And that is developed, so we ended up being the only company that had a fully integrated web-based solution. And the larger companies that really easily could have put the resources into this just saw this as a little niche market, not worth going after, and so they didn't really pursue it. And it turns out that web filings, later named Workiva, ended up really being able to be the market leader in this space. And today they count, their customers include more than 75% of the Fortune 500 and about 1,200 employees in the company. The most common comments that we would hear when we would demo the product were that, I thought of that. I'd say in maybe 90% of the meetings that we would go to initially, that's what they would say. I thought of that. Everybody thought about it. They knew what their pain was, but nobody did anything about it. And oftentimes you're going to have ideas or something, and you're going to say, well, why didn't anyone else do that? It's just because no one else took the initiative. And the other one, which was I took as really this great compliment, was when people would say, this was obviously designed by somebody who understands what I do for a living. And that meant we really nailed it on the head. We got our first product out the door, and it really hit what the market need was. And that's also really tough to do. Most of the time, development teams kind of are off by some percentage. And then it takes them another year or however long to kind of redesign the product, more money, more time, more frustration, more dilution for the ownership. So we really hit that one and got that out the door in a pretty good way. So the most gratifying aspects for me of starting web filings, I would say, are, number one, not in order of gratification, but the first one was that our customers really felt that this changed their life. It allowed them to have a greater work-life balance. It just offered tremendous efficiency for them, and they really gushed about how helpful this was for them. Second is that we raised money privately, and a lot of my family and friends invested in us and believed in me, and I'm happy to say they're all still talking to me, and that does not always happen when you invest in early-stage private companies. The third is that there's 1,200 families, 1,200 employees at the company who their livelihood really is based on this idea that I developed, and that's really gratifying. And then, for me, the most important always is the relationship with the people that I work with. And it was just really gratifying for me to be able to help and mentor people and develop their careers and also help them with their wealth creation that they got from being able to come early to something that developed really well. So the message that I would like to leave with you is twofold. The first is that you don't know, the vast majority of you don't know, you cannot know, I would say, how your career is going to develop, what your interests are going to be, where your successes are going to come from, where your passions are going to come from. Those just have to be developed over time. And the kind of other part of that is I would say I was a late bloomer. I suspect maybe a lot of you are late bloomers, or will be late bloomers. And give yourself the benefit of the doubt that you may have a lot more going on for you than you give yourself credit for. And what you really need to do is be able to put yourself in environments where you could be mentored, where you can grow and continuously learn, and where you keep your ear open for opportunity. And if you do those things, I think great things will happen for you. Thank you.